Today, I answer a question about whether all carbohydrates are actually sugars. I'm Brian Rigby, and this is Ask Brian. Today's question comes from Sess. Sess writes, I'm still trying to understand why some carbs are so bad. Is it true that 1 gram of carbohydrate is basically equivalent to 1 gram of sugar? In answer to your question, Sess, yes, that is true, but we need to distinguish by what we typically mean by sugar and what a biochemist or a nutritionist would mean by sugar. When we talk about sugar, we generally mean sucrose, or the sort of sugar that we would throw onto our food to make it taste sweeter. When a nutritionist or a biochemist talks about sugar, they mean the basic building blocks of carbohydrates. There's glucose, fructose, and galactose. Glucose is by far the most abundant simple sugar out there and creates the carbohydrate chains that we find in most foods. Fructose, on the other hand, is fairly rare. It's only really found in fruits. And galactose is the rarest of all. We only find galactose in milk products. When we talk about whether a carbohydrate is good or bad, we don't usually mean whether it contains these simple sugars or not. It's a guarantee that they're going to contain them. What we're worried about is how complex these carbohydrates are. Complex carbohydrates are primarily chains of glucose. And what's great about having a chain of glucose is that our digestive enzymes can only break one bit off at a time, meaning that it takes a while to process that entire chain down into its single glucose molecules. The other thing that makes complex carbohydrates great is that generally, if you think about a plant and a plant cells have a cell wall surrounding them. And cell walls need to be broken down in order to access the carbohydrates within. So there's a mechanical problem as well that takes some time to overcome. So when we talk about complex carbohydrates, we digest them much slower because we need to do work in order to get the carbohydrates out of them. The other thing that we need to think about, though, is even after we digest them, how fast does our body absorb them? Glucose, again, the most common carbohydrate that we're going to encounter in things such as sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, even bread and wheat, and all those other grains, glucose can only be absorbed at a maximum rate of 60 grams per hour. That means that even if you were to consume 180 grams of carbohydrate in a single sitting, it would require 3 hours in order to digest and absorb all of those carbohydrates, even if they were in the simplest form imaginable. But when we add fructose to the mix, we up our absorption rate to 90 grams per hour. So that means that when we have sweetened foods like cakes or cookies or sodas, that we actually absorb the carbohydrates in them 150% faster. We can bring 90 grams of carbohydrates into our body in a single hour. This can make a huge difference over time, and this is, in my opinion, one reason why sweetened foods and sugary foods are so much worse than foods that are whole. Even if you got fructose and glucose from a whole food source, such as a fruit, all that extra stuff in the way, those chains they have to break down and the cell walls they have to get around, are going to slow the digestion down so that you don't absorb it at 90 grams per hour. So in answer to your question, yes, all carbohydrates are formed out as simple sugars, but it's not the sugars that make it bad so much as it's how fast we absorb them. How fast we absorb them is going to depend on how fast we can digest them and how fast we can physically bring that sugar into our bloodstream. Simple sugars, the sweetened products that we want to avoid, digest very quickly and they're absorbed very quickly, and that's why they're bad for us. Subscribe to Ask Brian and get more nutrition every week. Have a nutrition question for me? Go to Peer Trainer University.